Hey all, happy October, happy 31 days of horror. I hope you had a wonderful start to your month. I know I did. Yesterday was an amazing time on TikTok, and today we kick off our videos for 31 days of horror. Straight up with a recommendation. You want to kill some time? You want to watch a horror series that's shorter than your average Marvel film? Two Sentence Horror Stories. Season 2 is streaming on Netflix. This is a beautiful, diverse, representative horror series, anthology style, episodes of 20 minutes long, inspired by the Two Sentence Horror Stories thread on Reddit. Excellent. Love it. Time for day 2 of 31 Days of Horror 2020. We're looking at Nightmare Cinema. This is a new anthology film streaming on Shudder from producer Mick Garris, who you've heard me talk about him before. He also produced the Masters of Horror and Fear Itself series. He got a bunch of heavy hitters, including Joe Dante, to make short horror films for an anthology horror about a mysterious character called Projectionist, luring people into an abandoned movie theater to watch horror films inspired by their worst nightmares that will determine what their future will be. Not all of them hit for me, but the good far outweighs the bad. You can watch it on Shudder. Highly recommend. Great spooky vibes. Oh, we have bonuses popping up all over the place for 31 Days of Horror. Because I can't contain myself and I have regular features that still need to go up. Bonus on day 2. Have you heard of the 2009 horror thriller Donkey Punch? Yes, it was this huge sensationalized, oh my goodness, how can they make a horror film about that? And then it turned out to actually be a really good claustrophobic thriller on a boat about an accident in open water and people not wanting to discuss it or take responsibility. So they'd rather try and destroy each other completely than report an accident. If you can find it, it's really good. Adults only on this one. That should be obvious from the title, but solid pick. It is time for day 3 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge, straight from my car. We are talking about the iconic, the everlasting, the makes me swoon, makes my heart stop, Phantasm. That's the series we're going to be covering every Saturday this month, and this Don Coscarelli penned series of 5 films features the role that made Angus Scrimm a horror icon, the Tall Man, a maybe alien, definitely inhuman figure who can shapeshift, control floating deadly metal orbs, and produces clones of corpses to fight for him. It is... You need to watch it. Get the remastered version on Shudder. Chef's kiss. Welcome back. Today is day 4 of our 31 Days of Horror Challenge, and Sundays are all about the documentary this year. Our first documentary is Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror. This is based on the nonfiction book by Robin R. Means Coleman about the role of Black creators, artists, and audiences in the development of American horror. This is a must-watch for any horror fan, and especially any horror critic, because, like the book did, but in a much shorter form, it recontextualizes our knowledge and understanding of the history of horror, bringing the racism and racial-based violence and reactionary violence to the forefront of the discussion. Day 5 of 31 Days of Horror 2020 brings me to one of my favorite films. Forget horror films. Films of all time. I am talking about Anna Biller's 2016 auteur masterpiece, The Love Witch. She acted as writer, director, editor, set designer, art director, costume designer, composer, and probably a bunch of other jobs she didn't even list for herself. It took her 7 years to create the story of Elaine, a witch who calls herself a love witch and uses the power of her body to channel her magic and try to find true love. This is a late 1960s, early 1970s styled horror film. especially in that witchy genre where women are evil and take control of men. That puts a feminist spin on it and reclaims the style, the tropes, and the stories for the modern age. Let's talk a little more about The Love Witch. The design on this film is everything. Elaine's world is color coordinated. She shows up in her first scene in a red convertible, wearing a red dress, red heels, a bright red lip, and carrying bright red luggage, all in the exact same tone and shade. When she switches to another location, her light pink outfit matches the powder pink aesthetic of pink everywhere in the tea room. It goes on and on from there. I don't want to go too much into it because if I go even one scene further, it starts spoiling the film. The artwork on the walls, the color of the bottles, the text, the lettering, how she interacts with different people and what she chooses to wear, all defines the story. It's magnificent. Let's talk about Richard Stanley's Color Out of Space. This is a new sci-fi horror film streaming exclusively on Shudder, starring Nicolas Cage. And yes, it is an adaptation of an H.P. Lovecraft story, The Color Out of Space. And yes, it falls for the big Lovecraft mistake, which is don't try to tell one of his stories well, try to tell all of his stories at the same time. Here's the thing. It looks good. The second hour is significantly better than the first. The last act is what Lovecraft cinema should be, but you gotta get there to see it. It's not bad. Earlier I put up a video about Color Out of Space, the new 2020 sci-fi horror streaming exclusively on Shudder, and I figured, listen, there's an interest in this kind of Lovecraftian cinema, I know there is, for better or worse. Might as well show you the best one there is. This is Call of Cthulhu. It is created by the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society. It is a black and white film that presents itself as a documentary. Really well done. It very much feels like Haxan, the black and white documentary about witchcraft in the United States, and it stays true to the stories it tells. Welcome to Day 7 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge 2020. Today we're going to be looking at Rob Zombie's 2013 horror film, The Lords of Salem. This is a film I, full disclosure, avoided for a long time because I heard not great things about it from people I trust, and it weighs heavily in my mind. I have friends who are critics, I have friends who are horror experts, I have friends with very similar backgrounds to me. I don't always agree with them, and this is one of those times I don't agree. Rob Zombie made a throwback horror films at 60s, 70s era. I think the same period that The Love Witch is playing with. And yeah, it gets to that full-out, crazy, grindhouse level in the third act. But he is playing in a very different place for him, and it was really exciting for me to watch. All right, we are up to Day 8 of the 31 Days of Horror 2020 Challenge for Sketching Details. And at least once in the month of October, I like to write about some kind of anime series. There is this whole wealth of horror anime to choose from, and I went easy mode on myself, something I knew I could write about with authority, which is like a quick rush through the series. Death Note. Death Note is one of my favorite TV series of all time. Sub or dub makes no difference to me. The issues with the memification of that one scene with the potato chips are unfortunate, and it's a matter of translation and context. Trust me, it's as effective as some of those Hitchcock, I'm going to show you exactly what's going to happen and you can't stop me scenes. Really good series. Go ahead and give it a watch. Let's talk the Masters of Horror episode, The Black Cat. This was Stuart Gordon's second episode on the series, and he got Jeffrey Combs to come back and work with him. Jeffrey Combs was the star of Reanimator and From Beyond and many other Stuart Gordon films. They kind of helped shape each other's careers. And in this one, Jeffrey Combs plays Edgar Allan Poe. But Edgar Allan Poe's stories are now all based in reality. So the Black Cat is his own pet cat. that he's blaming for all of the issues plaguing his wife on her dying days from consumption. It is a wild episode. I don't know if I could say it's good, but Combs' performance is good. The direction and tone are good. And yeah, the artistic style, perfection. Welcome to day 9 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge from Sketching Details. I got a real good one for you today. We are talking about Prevenge. This is writer, director, actor Alice Lowe's debut feature-length horror film about a pregnant woman going on a not-aliving spree. This film blew up on the indie film circuit in 2016 going into 2017. Critically acclaimed, tons of awards around the world, and Alice Lowe starred in it while she herself was pregnant, and her child was born after principal photography, so her own child is the child in the film. It is a fascinating spin on the evil child genre, and well worth the watch. Really brilliant dark comedy slasher film. I don't know about you, but for me, Halloween month, spooky times, nothing quite tops an Edgar Allan Poe film. You have those brilliant Roger Corman directed Vincent Price starring films from the 60s and 70s. Beautiful. And there's all kinds of other people who have done them. Did you know George Romero and Dario Argento collaborated on an Edgar Allan Poe film? In 1990 or 1991, depending on which market you're in, they released Two Evil Eyes, where after paying tribute to the grave of Edgar Allan Poe, Argento and Romero both released hour-long horror films as a 2-part anthology. It's a ride. It's very different adaptations of the stories, and they might not both hit for you. Romero's is among his best work, and Argento made a pretty film. I'm having a rough mental health day. My depression's really bad, so I'm going to share with you another one of my horror comfort films. This is Nobuhiko Obayashi's House. It is a 1977 haunted house film from Japan, and it is amazing in all the best ways. If you like strange, weird fiction, this is the film for you. A group of young women find and visit a relative's house that's remote, out of nowhere, long train ride, all that stuff, and face incredibly bizarre and ironic deaths caused by the spirits in the house, including someone being eaten by a piano. It is wild. It has this great animation element to it, and I love it. It makes me happy. My hair will not cooperate today, which means you get a very rare appearance of me with a hat on Haunted Mansion. Today is day 11 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge, and it is a Sunday, which means we are looking at a documentary. And that documentary is Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street. This is, not an exaggeration, the most important documentary you should watch if you have an interest in why the entertainment industry the way it is in 2020. It obviously deals with A Nightmare on Elm Street, specifically the Part 2 Freddy's Revenge sequel, which was a victim of homophobia and the AIDS crisis of the 1980s. Specifically Hollywood's response to it, which was just as bad as the federal government's response to it. This is first-person narrative of recent history that people should know about, and some of us grew up with. Welcome back. We have a little catch-up to do today. I hope you had a wonderful time yesterday. TikTok looked amazing. Let's start with day 12 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge. We took a look at Alexandra Aja's Crawl. This is a 2019 horror film. It's kind of a survival horror film. It's a mix of a home invasion and a natural disaster film. A competitive swimmer drives to her father's house during a Category 5 hurricane evacuation order to find out what's happening with him. Discovers him trapped in the crawl space, unconscious, with the water levels rising, and alligators entering the home through a large pipe. It's really, really well done. Welcome to day 13 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge. Today's topic is Come to Daddy. This is a horror film starring Elijah Wood as a 35-year-old man reuniting with the father who left him when he was 5 years old in a remote house by the beach on the side of a cliff. This is a strange one. Like, even by my standards, this is straight up weird fiction territory. It's experimental cinema. Each act of the story is a different style of horror story. And I'll warn you right now, the first act is about abuse. It's emotional abuse and neglect from a father who never wanted a child towards his son, and the son struggling to cope. The second act is a gothic horror story where he winds up in a house by himself. And the third act is a comedic horror thriller. Good or bad, can't say. Interesting for sure. Welcome back. It is day 14 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge. And today, we're looking at a short film. This is called The Quiet Room. It is a 28-minute horror short from writer-director Sam Weinman about... that right there for you. A writer winds up being put on a 72-hour hold because he's considered a danger to himself at a mental facility with its own urban legend. Helpless Hattie lives in the quiet room and targets specifically men who have... This is exceptionally well done and sensitive towards these topics in a way horror typically isn't. Really good production values. You can find it on Shudder. If you can handle it's really good. Let's talk about the most unlikely episode of Masters of Horror that happened in the existence of the series in its Masters of Horror form. So Peter Medak, who did direct The Changeling, so he did make an acclaimed horror film, but mostly didn't direct horror, directs an adaptation of a Bentley Little story, who's barely seen his work adapted. People barely know anything about him because he just doesn't do publicity or press, about how the founding fathers were actually cannibals, preying on children. And it's an adventure film in the style of E.T. rather than a horror story. This is wild. It's one of the best produced episodes, but it's not really a horror story. Curious. Hey there, it's day 15 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge 2020, and I am in my final form for fall, wrapped in a sweater, covered in paint, and still drinking iced coffee. Let's get into it. Today is about the Netflix original series, Ju-On Origins. Ju-On Origins, which Ju-On series is typically known as The Grudge in America in more Western audiences, is a long-running Japanese horror series about a cursed or haunted house, depending on your interpretation, where anyone who entered is doomed to be destroyed. Ju-On Origins claims that the original story that inspired the series is scarier than anything that's happened in the movies. That's their segue to turn Ju-On into a true crime horror series. It's really scary. It's really well written. Here's my concern, and it didn't work for me because of this. Check the content warning, imagine a worst case scenario, and assume it's even worse than that. Be safe. Welcome to day 16 of the 31 Days of Horror. Our film for today is 2020's Guns Akimbo. Is this actually a horror film? It meets my standards. I view the killer game genre, think Death Race 2000, Battle Royale, Hunger Games, Ready or Not, Series 7 The Contenders, and yes, Guns Akimbo, and even The Most Dangerous Game, as inherently horror. So Miles is an internet troll. His goal is to get a rise out of people, make them embarrass themselves, and he does it in the wrong live stream. He does it for a game called Schism, where two random people are forced to fight until one of them is unalive, and he winds up waking up with weapons screwed into his hands and given 24 hours to defeat the series champion. We did it. We found it. The mystery has been solved. The Great Pumpkin has smiled upon us. Promising Young Woman has a release date in the United States. Christmas 2020. That means the distributor thinks Carey Mulligan's performance in a revenge film has a shot at an Academy Award in this bizarre year where no films could come out in theaters, kind of, but sort of, but then there's streaming options, but the Academy doesn't like streaming unless they do. Most of the time they don't. Anyway, Promising Young Woman, Ring in the Holidays, coming out Christmas 2020. Welcome back. It is day 17 of the 31 Days of Horror, and it's a Saturday, which means we're continuing our look at the Phantasm series. Phantasm 3, Lord of Death, is considered like the fan favorite of the Phantasm series. And in a lot of ways, it is just fan service. For one, now that the series isn't tied to Universal anymore, Don Coscarelli brought back Michael Baldwin to play Mike. He brought back the original actor for Jody. And of course, Reggie and the Tall Man return as well. This one is a mix of really campy, like, here's the silly stuff that people really react to in screenings, and a deep look at the lore of the series, as well as a thesis that is so Don Coscarelli. You cannot believe everything you see, because everything you see is not as simple as you think. Don Coscarelli makes horror films about perspective. How many times do I need to say this? One of my favorite features I added to Sketching Details a few months ago is something I'm calling the archives. And I've had versions of this before, but this one's special. I have written for so many websites that just do not exist anymore. And those contracts I have with them, if they even exist, are done. I never gave away my copyright to any of these sites for any of my writing. And now I'm taking it back. Right now I'm working through my years of Horror Thursday features at Man I Love Films, but I have other sites to go after next. Our newest topic was the 2001 or 2005, depending on your market, Japanese horror film Pulse, about downloading ghosts into your house. Really great film, really stylized, love it. Keep checking the archives. It is day 18 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge, and it's a Sunday, which means we're looking at a documentary about or related to horror. Today's subject is the Scary Stories documentary that's currently on Amazon Prime. And I gotta say, really wonderful source of information, great sense of authority the whole way through. They do a lot about the banned book aspect, which I was not expecting, especially since they got one of the people that led the charge to ban the book, the whole series of books, all three of them, from her school's library to actually be interviewed about it. It's also filled with a bunch of artists around my age talking about how this book influenced them. It's a bit of a mixed bag. As a documentary, it kind of jumps all over the place, but the information is great, and there are these really creepy animated segments that kind of draw your interest. Welcome to day 19 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge. Today is all about The Last Showing. The Last Showing is a 2014 meta-horror film starring Robert Englund as a projectionist who loses his job when the cinema chain he works at switches to all digital projection. And he refuses to do the training because he's a master projectionist and knows how to cut film and everything else. He decides he's going to give the audiences what they want, which is a realistic, low-grain footage horror film, by casting the people around him as the actors in a film they don't know they're in, and forcing them into horrifying situations. The Last Showing is exceptional meta-horror, and there are a ton of layers I don't have time to go into. It's enough just to watch it for Robert Englund's performance. You so rarely see him without a full mask of prosthetics, and he's very good. To be fair, I had another topic I wanted to talk about when I decided to skip out on my Pulse video the first time around. But Pulse is one of those foundational, massive breakout hit Japanese horror films, J-horror era, 2001, that deserves its due. Pulse is a ghost story inspired by the internet. It's a fear of technology film. And for those young people watching that didn't live through the dial-up internet era, you might not understand what's going on. You would visit a website in this film and agree to be scared by something, and you click OK, and a ghost would slowly download into your house and could not be stopped unless someone stopped you from using the internet in the minute or so it took to download a ghost. Really beautiful, atmospheric, and terrifying. I just smiled my whole way through a 2-hour special. The Boulet Brothers' Dragula Resurrected is spectacular. If you are a fan of the Dracula competition, if you are a fan of good Halloween specials, if you are a fan of drag performers, if you are a fan of horror, you need to get on Shudder and watch this. It is mind-blowing. If you've never seen Dragula, it's the perfect introduction. 7 former contestants compete for a chance to win $20,000 and a slot on the season 4 cast. They had to present original witch, ghost, and vampire looks, and it's mind-blowing. These people are amazing. Welcome to day 20 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge. Today we're taking a look at writer-director Matthew Holness's Possum. This is an experimental, almost art film about a puppeteer who loses his career after a disastrous performance and feels he can reclaim his life after moving back home if he destroys the puppet. But puppets can't be killed, according to this story. This is a weird one, even for me. It didn't work for me, but it was quite scary and quite suspenseful. I just don't get 100% what it was going for. Like, I see it, I understand it, I value it. It didn't work for me. It is so experimental. I think everyone's reaction is going to be very different. Streaming on Amazon. Welcome to day 21 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge. Today we're looking at a very strange one, even stranger than Possum yesterday. This is Jasper Noé's Climax. This is a film that came out at 2018 in most of the world, 2019 in America, about a group of dancers who audition to be part of an international touring troupe, celebrate after a really strong rehearsal, but someone has spiked the drink with hallucinogenic drugs. Noé wrote a 5-page treatment for a 90-minute horror film, cast a bunch of phenomenal Vogue femme and ballroom and breakdancers to perform it, and let them improvise all the dialogue to make it as natural and disturbing as possible. Let's just say there's a reason we cast dancers to play the monsters in horror films, and this time they don't got a rubber mask on their face. This one's for adults only, streaming on Amazon Prime. I'm actually a little sad about this one. I've been doing a weekly review recap series of the Masters of Horror series, one of my favorite shows of all time, at the Avocado, and we reached the series finale. Season 2's Dream Cruise from writer-director Norio Saruta. This is a mix between Dead Calm and, let's say, fair enough, Ring, because he made one of the Ring films, about an American lawyer who starts an affair with one of his client's wives. So the client invites him out to open water and tries to end their lives for it. There's more going on. It's the only episode in the series of 1-hour horror films that was shot as a 90-minute feature and then edited down. And you can tell a lot of effort went into it. I really dig this one. Welcome to day 22 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge. It's a Thursday and we are looking at another horror TV series. This is A Discovery of Witches, which is currently streaming on Shudder. It is based on Deborah Harkness's All Souls trilogy, and it is the story of Diana, a doctor doing research on alchemy at Oxford University, who uncovers and recalls a book from the stacks that has been missing for centuries. Every witch, every vampire, and every demon in the world is suddenly aware of her presence and wants that book that they believe explains the origin of all of them and gives the power to create and destroy. It's really good. It's really suspenseful. You rarely find films and series about academia that work as well as this, and I enjoyed the whole thing. Alright, we're doing a little video game content as a bonus for a 31 Days of Horror Challenge. Dead by Daylight is one of my favorite games. I've been playing it since the beta, and I have a love-hate relationship with it. I'm going to be perfectly honest. There are things that the developers, Behavior Interactive, do that are wonderful. And there are things that they do that continue to confound and confuse me in ways you can't imagine. The new Halloween event just came out, and it's one of those why moments. All of the events up to this point have been about earning blood points and getting free limited time cosmetics. This time, if you want the cosmetics for the Blight-related event, you gotta pay for them. And some of them you need to buy through the Battle Pass, the Rift Pass, to even access them, and pay even more if you can't finish it. It's a cash grab event, and I'm not happy. Welcome to day 23 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge. Today's topic is writer-director Robert Eggers' film, The Lighthouse. Robert Eggers is the mind behind The Witch, which is one of my favorite horror films of all time, and he followed it up with a black and white horror film in a 1.19 by 1 aspect ratio about two lighthouse keepers slowly losing their grip of reality while working on a remote job. It's kind of hard to explain. There's a really strong masculine energy to this film, which isn't necessarily a bad film. It's a little off-putting for me. It was a little too... But it is exceptionally well made. It is terrifying. And I did not see all the twists and turns coming. It's hard, but it's good. I got to revisit one of my favorite pieces from when I was writing at Man I Love Films. Do you remember the Skype horror film Unfriended? This was a haunted webcam web chat film where 6 teenagers enter the chat together on the anniversary of their friend's death. And a mysterious 7th person who didn't show their face was in the chat room and claimed to be the spirit of their friend, and forced them into a deadly game of truth or dare, where if they turn off the camera, it was game over. And if they couldn't tell the truth, it was also game over. It still really holds up. It's one of those fear of technology films that actually had a story to tell in a voice, and that voice is the nature of bullying in a cyber age. It is day 24 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge, and we are taking another look at the Phantasm series. Today is about Phantasm 4 Oblivion, the fourth film in the sci-fi horror action slasher series. This one is the most philosophical entry in the series to date. The 3 heroes, Jody, Mike, and Reggie, are all set off on their different adventures, and everything in the film is about the nature of time and its impact on reality. The Tall Man's powers are apparently all connected to time, in addition to life and death and reanimation and floating silver orbs. Don't let anyone tell you fans reaching out to developers never makes a difference. We have an update on the new DBD Halloween event. Behavior, starting today, October 24th, at 11 a.m. Eastern, is going to provide every player who logs in with bonus blood points and bonus iridescent shards, the not monetary currency in the game, all the way through November 4th. If you log in every day, that gives you, at a minimum, enough iridescent shards to buy a free cosmetic tied to the event. Usually we can earn 2. One is an improvement, and the blood point bonus is a nice apology for the blatant cash grab of the original. Here's an event where you can't earn anything, watch someone else's stream, put in random codes you put on Twitter, and spend your money event. Welcome to day 25 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge. It's a Sunday, which means we're looking at a documentary, and this time it is Rodney Asher's Primal Scream. Rodney Asher is the director behind the Room 237 documentary about fans' conspiracy theories about the true meaning of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, as well as The Nightmare, the terrifying documentary about sleep paralysis that was on Netflix for a very long time, might still be. Anyway, Primal Scream is an exploration of those early childhood moments that terrify us and create a fear that's also a fascination. It's in his typical style of recreations of narratives interspliced with footage from films and media, and it's focused on children who were impacted by the 1970s horror film Magic about the living ventriloquist doll. It's good. Welcome to day 26 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge. Today is another short horror film you may not have heard before called Blankety. Blankety is currently streaming on Shudder, and it's a play on an old favorite. So you've all seen by now those randomly generated by a computer, I'm going to feed it all of this script or all of this series, all of these books, and have it write a new one. This is a horror film that takes it to the next level. This is about a research team trying to teach a computer to write fiction. And the way they're getting their data, because computers need data to start making those associations, is to harvest the trauma of human beings to create believable stories. It's even stranger than that. It's 11 minutes long and incredibly high concept, very dense. It's an experience. I am really excited about this one. Today is the release of the 3rd episode of Spookier Times, my podcast about horror, gothic, and weird fiction across media. And it's our Halloween special. Did I launch this podcast just so I could have a Halloween special in 2020 and give me some source of joy? Yes. Yes, I did. Is it working well? I think so. Our theme for the Halloween special, the first ever one for this ongoing bi-weekly podcast, is Edgar Allan Poe. We start by looking at the Roger Corman, Vincent Price, Richard Matheson collaborations in the context of Poe's role in American horror. I give you a sneak peek of an original musical I've been working on, inspired by Poe's work, and close out with 4 recommendations of other Poe adaptations you can watch and enjoy or listen to right now. It is day 27 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge, and we are talking about the 2020 horror film, Spiral. This is, I'm going to be direct on this. I honestly suggest you check the content warning on my written review because there's really upsetting and offensive stereotypes about gay people used as a driving point of conflict in this story. It crossed the line for me, and I've seen a lot of horror films, so take that into consideration. Anyway, it's a convince someone that the world they see isn't real story. A gay couple moves into a small town with their teenage daughter in 1995, and one partner believes the town is trying to destroy them and tries to find evidence to prove it before it's too late. Really suspenseful. The lead performance by Jeffrey Boyer Chapman is excellent, and it works. Welcome to day 28 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge. Today we're looking at a sequel, an unexpected one. We're looking at The Strangers Prey at Night. Why is it unexpected? Well, the original film came out in 2008, and it was this breakout indie hit from the writer-director, right? Brought back the significance of the home invasion film to American horror cinema. And then 10 years passed before we got the sequel. The sequel works on the same formula. There are 3 masked strangers wandering around remote houses, knocking on the door, seeing if anyone will answer, and if you answer, that's your invitation to come inside and torment you through the night until they're done playing with you. The sequel, it works. It follows the same beats, doesn't shake up the formula too much. New story, brand new cast, new director, the guy who did 47 Meters Down did it. It's great. Today marks the start of my Fear Itself recap / review series at The Avocado. If you don't know what Fear Itself is, it's the unofficial 3rd season of Showtime's Masters of Horror. After season 2, Showtime said, we're not financing the show anymore, which was how it got produced at all. Showtime said, here's money to make original horror films, make it a TV series. Lionsgate stepped in and produced another season of the show, which was then edited down to air on NBC at 10 p.m. on Thursday nights. A lot of things happen with the series. The episodes are not any worse or better than the Masters of Horror show. It's just a very different format. 45-minute horror films versus hour-long horror films that are broken up by commercial breaks aren't going to be as scary and aren't going to tie together as well. Welcome to day 29 of the 31 Days of Horror. We're looking at another TV series on a Thursday, and our last one of the month is AMC's Nosferatu. This is an adaptation of Joe Hill's brutal, cruel, fascinating horror novel of the same name. Basically, there are a group of people in the world who have very specific special abilities. They're not superpowers, it's more magic. Like, a librarian can scry the answer to any question with Scrabble tiles. A young woman can ride her dirt bike through a covered bridge that doesn't exist to find any lost object. And a monstrous man named Charlie Manx travels across the country and lures children to follow him to Christmas Land. I don't want to give too much away on this show because it's filled with surprises and it's wonderful. The cast is amazing. I think it might even improve on the novel. It's definitely worth checking out. Hey, Book Talk, I have Joe Hill on the brain after a Nosferatu review, so we're going to talk about him. Joe Hill is one of the rising superstars in the world of horror, and he did it mostly on his own. He took on the name Joe Hill to separate himself from his father, Stephen King. Their books are nothing alike, so if that's a concern to you, like it was to me, don't worry, he knows how to edit. And if it worries you in the other way, he's still a really good horror writer. Trust me, they both love world building. His breakout book was Heart-Shaped Box, which was a story of a heavy metal singer who gets a cursed object that starts to destroy everyone around him. But his most famous work right now is Nosferatu, a magical, cross-dimensional, cross-country horror novel about people with special abilities who are punished for using them. He has this cruel and brutal style that's also incredibly beautiful and haunting. Check him out. We are up to day 30 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge. Today is about a vampire film called The Shed. And I'm going to warn you right now, this film is heavy. The main character, Stanley, is a 17-year-old living in an abusive household, treated like he's absolute garbage by everyone around him because his parents are dead, he's poor, and after lashing out in grief, he wound up in juvenile hall. The story does not let up the entire runtime. There's no breathing room. And there is room for this kind of horror narrative. Something this intense does have an audience. But if you're not expecting something with zero levity, no jokes, no humor, no life, no happiness, no joy, you need to be aware that this kind of film like The Shed exists and will push you. One of my favorite forms for horror is the animated film. And I was digging through some old posts to recover from sites that don't exist anymore and found my review of Kakurembo. This is a Japanese 30-minute horror short, animated, from 2005, and it's still really scary. A group of 7 children arrive at the gates of a mysterious district that can only be found by following clues instead of street signs to play a deadly game of hide and seek with monsters who have been hiding in plain sight for centuries. They all don masks and cosplay that indicates that they're a hero or a villain in the story, and are chased around the neighborhood with the goal of survival throughout the night. It's beautiful, it's terrifying, it's one of the scariest shorts I can remember. Happy Halloween! It is day 31 of the 31 Days of Horror Challenge, and we're finishing out the Phantasm series today. Ravager is the 5th and final entry in the series. It is the first entry in the Phantasm series that Don Coscarelli did not direct himself. He brought on someone else to co-write and direct, and it looks like a very different film, but it's hitting on all the same themes. It's actually the saddest entry, it's the most heartfelt entry. It's many years later, and Reggie has been diagnosed with early onset dementia because of his stories about the tall man. So Mike takes him to live at a really wonderful assisted living facility. But the tall man is real, but Reggie is not acting like himself. And there's multiple timelines all clashing together. You thought it was about perspective and time and not trusting what you see before. This, every scene changes. It's wonderful. I love it. So while I have your attention on Halloween, my favorite day of the year, the most important day of the year for me, I'd like to introduce the project I've been teasing this week. Tick, a short musical, is an original musical I wrote as part of a larger project called The Sublime Method that I hope to have done within the next year. That is what I'm calling an anthology horror musical. It's all inspired by the works of Edgar Allan Poe. There's a really cool framework for the whole thing. It involves the poetry and the stories. Tick is the first complete unit all by itself. The rest is all in pieces all over the place, but Tick is a standalone. that can be performed in and out of the show, based on the Telltale Heart. All the information is in the link tree. The demo is up. You can order the script on My Coffee. You can order the demo on My Coffee. The sheet music is almost ready. I still need a little more time to finish preparing that, but the book does have the melodies written out. Enjoy.